AITA for kicking my sister out of my wedding for wearing the wrong color. I'm a 25-year-old woman who spent most of her life being an afterthought in her own family. For years, I was the good girl, the one who always understood, always gave in, always stepped aside. But not anymore, not on my wedding day. At least that's what I told myself. You see, my wedding was supposed to be my moment. The day when, finally, it was all about me and what I wanted. No compromises, no sacrifices, just pure, unadulterated joy. And for the most part, it was. Until my sister Julie showed up in that damn purple dress. Before I dive into the wedding day drama, let me give you some context. It's a long story, and I'm still trying to untangle my feelings about it all. But I need to know, did I go too far? Or was I justified in standing my ground just this once? Growing up, I was the typical only child, the center of my parents' world. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they made sure I had everything I needed. Weekends were filled with trips to the park, bedtime stories, and family game nights. I was happy, secure, and loved. I was 9 when my parents sat me down and told me we were going to adopt a little girl. They explained how some children didn't have families and needed homes. My young mind conjured images of instant sisterhood, matching outfits, shared secrets, and a built-in best friend. I was thrilled. The day Julie arrived, I was bouncing off the walls with excitement, but the little girl who walked through our door wasn't the playmate I'd imagined. Julie was thin, quiet, and looked terrified of her own shadow. My parents had explained that she came from a bad situation, but I didn't fully grasp what that meant until I saw her flinch when my dad tried to hug her. Gradually, Julie began to open up, but with that came a new set of challenges. She'd throw tantrums over the smallest things, if her toast was cut wrong or if someone changed the TV channel without asking. Instead of disciplining her, my parents would rush to soothe her, explaining to me that Julie needed extra patience and understanding. I remember the day my mom asked if I'd be willing to switch bedrooms with Julie. Mine was bigger and had a nicer view. It might help Julie feel more at home, Mom said, her eyes pleading. I agreed, of course. After all, I was the big sister now. I had to set an example. That was just the beginning. Time went on, and more of my life seemed to revolve around Julie's needs and wants. Family vacations were planned around activities Julie enjoyed. Movie nights featured her picks. Even my birthday parties became more about making sure Julie felt included than celebrating me. I understood why my parents did it. Julie had been through trauma, and she needed extra care. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less when I realized my science fair was the same night as Julie's dance recital, and my parents chose to attend hers. Or when my Sweet 16 party was canceled because Julie was having a particularly bad week and couldn't handle the excitement. As I entered my teenage years, I found myself retreating from family life. I threw myself into every extracurricular activity I could find: soccer, debate club, yearbook committee, anything to keep me out of the house and away from the constant reminder that I was second best. I got my first job at 12, shelving books at the local library, something that had nothing to do with Julie. I saved every penny, dreaming of the day I could buy my own car and drive away from it all. High school brought new freedoms and new escapes. I joined 3 different sports teams and the marching band. My weekends were filled with games, practices, and performances. I started dating, finding solace in boyfriends who saw me as a priority, even if it was just for a few hours. The day I turned 16, I was at the DMV when it opened, ready to take my driver's test. I passed on the first try, and the next day, I bought a beat-up old Volkswagen with my savings. My grades were good, my extracurriculars impressive. I applied to a dozen universities, all of them far from home. When the acceptance letters started rolling in, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in years. I chose a school on the opposite coast, as far from home as I could get without leaving the country. The day I left for college was bittersweet. My parents hugged me tight, tears in their eyes. Julie stood awkwardly to the side, mumbling a goodbye. College was a revelation. Suddenly, I wasn't defined by my relationship to Julie. I was just me. Smart, capable, driven. I made friends who knew nothing about my family drama. I excelled in my classes, joined clubs, and even studied abroad for a semester. It was during my junior year that I met Dustin. We were paired up for a group project in our marketing class. He was funny, kind, and actually listened when I spoke. Our project meetings turned into coffee dates, which turned into dinner dates. After graduation, Dustin and I both landed jobs in the city. We moved in together, adopting a cat and creating a life that was uniquely ours. I was thriving in my career, finally able to indulge in the things I'd missed out on growing up. Fancy dinners, spontaneous weekend trips, elaborate birthday parties, all the things that had always been sacrificed for Julie's sake. My relationship with my family remained strained. I visited for major holidays, but always kept my stays short. Phone calls were brief and superficial. I loved my parents, but I couldn't shake the resentment that had built up over the years. And Julie? We were polite to each other, but there was always an undercurrent of tension. When Dustin proposed on our 3rd anniversary, I was over the moon. As I slipped on the engagement ring, I felt like my life was finally falling into place. I had a man who loved me, a job I excelled at, and a future full of possibilities. The wedding planning began almost immediately. For once in my life, everything was going to be exactly as I wanted it. Just me and Dustin, celebrating our love. We decided on a whimsical color scheme: yellow for my side of the wedding party, blue for Dustin's, and green for our mutual friends. Yellow had always been my favorite color, bright and cheerful. It represented everything I wanted our future to be. I found the perfect dress, a stunning white gown with delicate green embroidery that tied in our color scheme. Dustin chose a sharp suit with a green boutonniere. Everything was falling into place. When it came time to tell my family about the wedding plans, I braced myself for the inevitable drama. I called my parents first, explaining the date we'd chosen and the color scheme we'd decided on. To my surprise, they seemed genuinely happy for me. They offered to help with the planning and even suggested hosting the rehearsal dinner. Telling Julie was harder. We hadn't spoken in months, and our relationship was tenuous at best. I considered not inviting her at all, but I knew that would cause more problems than it solved. So I swallowed my pride and called her. The conversation was awkward and stilted. Julie congratulated me in a tone that suggested she was anything but happy. When I explained the color scheme and told her she'd need to wear yellow, she was silent for a long moment. Then she laughed, as if I'd told a joke. "Yellow," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You know I hate yellow. It makes me look sick." I felt my hackles rise. Of course, Julie would find a way to make this about her, but I was determined not to let her ruin this for me. I explained as calmly as I could that the color scheme was important to me and Dustin, that it would mean a lot if she could just wear yellow for one day. Julie scoffed and said she'd think about it. I ended the call feeling drained and frustrated, but I pushed those feelings aside, focusing instead on the joy of planning my perfect day. As the wedding day approached, the tension in my family reached a boiling point. What should have been a joyous time of preparation and anticipation became a battlefield of wills, with my color scheme at the center of it all. A week before the wedding, Julie called me. Her voice dripped with disdain as she informed me that she wouldn't be wearing yellow. She'd bought a purple dress instead, she said, one that looked amazing on her. I felt my blood pressure rising with every word. This was so typical of Julie, always having to be the center of attention, always having to do things her way. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady as I reminded her of the color scheme. Yellow for my side, blue for Dustin's, green for mutual friends. It wasn't complicated, but Julie laughed it off, as if my wishes for my own wedding were nothing more than a joke to her. I told her, in no uncertain terms, that if she didn't wear yellow, she couldn't come to the wedding. The line went silent for a moment, and I could almost see the smirk on Julie's face. She didn't believe me. She thought this was just another instance where I'd back down, where I'd accommodate her whims as I'd done so many times before. But not this time. Not on my wedding day. My parents called. They couldn't understand why I was being so unreasonable over a color. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the color, not really. It was about respect. About Julie, for once in her life, considering someone else's feelings. But they didn't get it. They never had. Attempts at compromise fell flat. My mother suggested that perhaps Julie could wear a yellow accessory with her purple dress. My father proposed that we change the color scheme altogether to accommodate everyone, but I stood firm. This was my wedding, my one day to have things exactly as I wanted them. Why was that so hard for them to understand? Dustin listened patiently as I vented my frustrations, offering a shoulder to cry on when it all became too much. He never pushed me one way or the other, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He worried about how this conflict would affect me, how it might cast a shadow over what should be the happiest day of our lives. My anxiety grew with each passing day. I found myself obsessively checking my phone, both dreading and hoping for a message from Julie or my parents. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if Julie showed up in purple anyway? What if my parents sided with her and refused to attend? What if this whole thing ruined the entire wedding? As dawn broke on my wedding day, I pushed all thoughts of Julie aside. This was my day, I reminded myself. No matter what happened, I was marrying the love of my life. Nothing else mattered. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and clear, as if the universe itself was celebrating with us. My hair and makeup artists worked their magic, transforming me into the bride I'd always dreamed of being. When I finally slipped into my wedding dress, I felt like a princess. The white fabric was soft against my skin, the green embroidery catching the light beautifully, but my moment of serenity was shattered as I walked towards the ceremony space. There, in the sea of yellow, blue, and green, was a flash of purple. Julie had come, and she was wearing the purple dress. I marched up to Julie, my white dress swishing around me. She smirked as I approached, clearly thinking she'd won. But not this time. Not on my wedding day. My parents tried to intervene, pleading with me to be reasonable, to not make a scene. But I was beyond reason. This was the final straw, the last in a long line of Julie's selfish actions. I gave Julie an ultimatum: change into a yellow dress or leave. She scoffed, clearly not believing I'd follow through on my threat. But I was done backing down, done compromising. When Julie refused to leave, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called security. The look of shock on Julie's face as the security guards approached was almost comical. She'd never imagined I'd actually go through with it. As Julie was escorted out, her protests echoing through the venue, my parents looked at me with disappointment and disbelief. I wondered if I'd just irreparably damaged my relationship with my family. But then Dustin was there, his hand warm and steady on my back. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to ground me, to remind me why we were here. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and prepared to walk down the aisle to marry the love of my life. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Dustin's eyes filled with tears as I approached, and I felt my own eyes welling up in response. This was right. This was what mattered. But even as we exchanged rings and shared our first kiss as a married couple, I couldn't help but be aware of the undercurrent of tension in the room. I could feel the whispers, see the sidelong glances. Everyone knew what had happened with Julie. On the surface, it was everything I'd dreamed of. The decorations were perfect, the food was delicious, and the DJ kept everyone on the dance floor. But there was an elephant in the room that no one quite knew how to address. My parents put on brave faces, smiling and chatting with guests, but I could see the strain in their eyes. They were torn between celebrating their daughter's wedding and worrying about the family drama that had just unfolded. As we drove away from the reception, cans clanking behind our car and our friends cheering, I couldn't help but wonder what the fallout would be. Had I irreparably damaged my relationship with my family? Dustin and I were on our honeymoon, surrounded by the beauty of a tropical paradise, but I couldn't fully shake the cloud of what had happened at the wedding. My phone was flooded with messages, some supportive, others scathing. Friends and extended family members had taken sides, turning what should have been a private family matter into a public debate. Some praised me for finally standing up for myself, for not letting Julie ruin my big day. Others criticized me for being petty, for letting a color cause such a rift in the family. My parents weren't speaking to me. The few messages they'd sent were terse and formal, a far cry from the loving relationship we'd once had. They were deeply disappointed in my actions, they said. They couldn't understand how I could do something so cruel to my sister. Julie had blocked me on every platform. Through mutual friends, I heard that she was playing the victim, telling anyone who would listen about how I'd humiliated her, how I'd always been jealous of her. It was infuriating, but also painfully familiar. Julie had always been good at twisting situations to her advantage. The social media fallout was intense. Despite our best efforts to keep the wedding photos private, someone had leaked a few. The comments were a battleground, with people arguing back and forth about whether I was justified in my actions or if I was, as one commenter put it, a bridezilla on a power trip. I found myself obsessively scrolling through these comments, torn between defending myself and wanting to disappear entirely. Dustin eventually had to take my phone away, gently reminding me that we were on our honeymoon and should be focusing on each other, not on what strangers on the internet thought of us. I turned to Dustin, voicing the question that had been plaguing me for days. Do you think I did the right thing? Dustin was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, thoughtful. I think you stood up for yourself, he said. After years of always giving in, you finally drew a line. Was it the best way to handle it? Maybe not. But I understand why you did it, and I'm proud of you for asserting yourself. As the first light of dawn began to creep through our curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control what happened next. I would reach out to my family, not to apologize. I still believed I had the right to stand up for myself, but to open a dialogue, to try and explain my side of things, and to listen to theirs. Update 1. I'd hoped that time and distance might have cooled tempers, that perhaps my family would be ready to talk things out rationally. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first sign that things had escalated beyond my wildest imagination came in the form of a certified letter from a lawyer. As it turned out, the reality was even more absurd. Julie was threatening to sue me for emotional distress caused by her ejection from the wedding. The letter detailed how she'd suffered severe psychological trauma from the incident, claiming she now had a phobia of the color yellow and couldn't so much as look at a banana without having a panic attack. I would have laughed if it wasn't so infuriating. This was classic Julie, taking things to the extreme, playing the victim to garner sympathy and attention. But as ridiculous as the claims were, the threat of legal action was very real and very stressful. Dustin and I spent a fortune on legal fees, consulting with attorneys to understand our options. The consensus was that Julie's case was weak, bordering on frivolous, but that didn't stop her from pressing forward. She seemed determined to drag this out, to make me pay for daring to stand up to her. As if the threat of a lawsuit wasn't enough, my parents decided to up the ante in their own uniquely dramatic way. They announced that they were legally changing their last name, effectively disowning me in the most public manner possible. Their reasoning? They claimed they couldn't bear to share a name with someone who would treat family so cruelly. The irony of their actions was not lost on me. In their attempt to punish me for my cruelty, they were exhibiting a level of pettiness that far surpassed anything I'd done. But reason and logic seemed to have no place in this family drama anymore. The situation took an even more bizarre turn when Julie started a viral social media campaign against me. She created a hashtag #JusticeForJulie and began sharing heavily edited and out-of-context video clips from the wedding. In her version of events, she was the innocent victim of a bridezilla's tyranny, cruelly expelled from a family celebration for daring to express her individuality. The internet, ever hungry for drama, latched onto the story with alarming enthusiasm. Soon, my social media was flooded with messages from strangers, ranging from death threats to offers to be on reality TV shows. It seemed everyone had an opinion on our family drama, and they weren't shy about sharing it. Dustin remained my anchor through the storm. He fielded calls from reporters, screened our mail for more legal threats, and reminded me daily that this too shall pass. Weeks turned into months, and the situation showed no signs of calming down. If anything, it seemed to be escalating. My parents, not to be outdone in the escalation of absurdity, decided to take their disowning of me to the next level. They held a formal de-daughtering ceremony, complete with printed invitations and a cake. The event, which they live-streamed on social media, involved them symbolically burning my baby photos and renouncing any claim to me as their child. The ceremony would have been laughable if it wasn't so hurtful. Watching the people who had raised me, who I had loved despite our difficulties, so publicly reject me was a pain I wasn't prepared for. It was one thing to argue, to disagree, even to not speak for a while, but this felt like a point of no return. Julie's social media campaign, once a viral sensation, began to lose steam. People moved on to the next internet outrage, leaving Julie shouting into an increasingly empty void. Her protests dwindled, then stopped altogether. My parents, perhaps realizing the ridiculousness of their de-daughtering ceremony, retreated from the public eye. The last I heard, discovered they had joined a support group for parents of color rebels, whatever that meant. The lawsuit threat from Julie was dismissed by a judge who seemed barely able to keep a straight face while reading the complaint. My boss, impressed by how I had handled the situation, offered me a promotion and the opportunity to transfer to our company's office in another state. Update 2. It all started about 6 months after Dustin and I had moved to our new city. We were settling into our new life, enjoying the peace and quiet that came with distance from my family drama. One lazy Sunday morning, as we were having breakfast, Dustin's phone buzzed with a message. "My parents want to have a video call with us," he said, his tone cautious. "They say it's important." While Dustin's parents had always been kind to me, we hadn't spoken much since the wedding fiasco. I couldn't help but wonder if they too had finally decided I was more trouble than I was worth. "We've been talking to your parents," she said. But what she said next left me speechless. "And quite frankly, we're appalled at how they've treated you." It turned out that they had been silently observing the whole situation since the wedding. They'd seen the social media posts, heard about the lawsuit, and witnessed the public shaming my family had put me through. And they had decided enough was enough. Without telling Dustin or me, they had taken it upon themselves to confront my parents. They detailed a series of meetings and conversations they'd had with my mom and dad, trying to make them see reason. They had pointed out in no uncertain terms how my parents' behavior was not just hurtful, but abusive. "We told them they were out of line," Tom said, his usually jovial face serious. "That they were fools to treat their flesh and blood this way over an ungrateful adopted child who clearly hasn't appreciated anything they've done for her." I felt a lump form in my throat. Hearing someone else, especially Dustin's parents, validate my feelings was overwhelming. For so long, I had questioned whether I was overreacting, whether I was the one in the wrong. But here were these people who owed me nothing, fighting for me. Linda continued, her voice soft but firm. "We want you to know, sweetheart, that we consider you our daughter. From the day Dustin brought you home, you became part of our family. And if your parents can't treat you with the love and respect you deserve, then we'll do it ourselves." Tears were flowing freely down my face now. Dustin squeezed my hand, his own eyes glistening, but Dustin's parents weren't done. They went on to explain that they had given my parents an ultimatum. Either they make genuine amends and start treating me with respect, or Dustin's family would cut all ties with them. This included withdrawing financial support for a business venture my dad had recently started with Tom's help. "We know it's not our place to tell you what to do," Tom said, "but we fully support you if you decide to cut ties with them. You don't owe them anything, especially not after how they've treated you." Dustin and I had many long conversations about what to do next. We also had several more calls with his parents, who provided unwavering support and guidance. They shared more details about their conversations with my parents, painting a picture of two people who had become so entrenched in their favoritism of Julie that they couldn't see the harm they were causing. "Your mother actually tried to defend the de-daughtering ceremony," Linda said during one call, her voice thick with disbelief. "She said it was meant to be a wake-up call for you. Can you believe that?" I could, actually. It was exactly the kind of twisted logic my parents had been operating under for years. But hearing it laid out so plainly by someone else made me realize just how warped things had become. The validation and support from Dustin's family acted as a balm to my wounded spirit. I began to see more clearly how dysfunctional my relationship with my biological family had been. The constant need to accommodate Julie, the dismissal of my feelings, the public shaming, none of it was normal or acceptable. It was during this time of reflection that I received the first tentative outreach from my parents. It came in the form of a short email, asking if we could talk. I showed it to Dustin, and we discussed it at length. In the end, I decided to respond with a brief message of my own. I told them that I wasn't ready to talk, that I needed time and space to heal. I also made it clear that if we were to have any relationship in the future, things would need to change drastically. Their response was disappointing but not surprising. They expressed regret for how things had gotten out of hand, but there was no real acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. They tried to explain away their actions, saying they were just trying to support Julie and that I had overreacted to the whole situation. It was at that moment that I knew what I had to do. With Dustin's support and the blessing of his family, I made the difficult decision to legally and emotionally cut ties with my biological family. The process was painful but liberating. I changed my phone number and email address. I blocked them on all social media platforms. I consulted with a lawyer to ensure that they could not make any legal claims against me in the future. I even went so far as to change my last name, taking Dustin's family name as my own. In the midst of all this, Dustin's family continued to be an incredible source of support. They welcomed me with open arms, insisting that I call them mom and dad. They made it clear in every way that I was not just their son's wife, but their daughter in every sense that mattered. Some people expressed shock and tried to convince me to reconcile with my biological family. Others, who had witnessed the drama unfold, expressed support and understanding. Julie, predictably, tried to spin the situation to her advantage. She made tearful social media posts about being abandoned by her sister, conveniently leaving out all the drama she had stirred up. But her posts no longer had the power to upset me. My biological parents made a few more attempts to reach out. They sent letters to our new address, pleading for another chance. The letters spoke of regret and missing me, but still lacked any real accountability. It was clear they still didn't fully understand the depth of hurt they had caused. One letter particularly stood out. In it, my mother wrote about how embarrassed they had been when Dustin's parents confronted them. She said they had never realized how their actions looked to outsiders, and that it had been a wake-up call. But even in this admission, there was a sense of concern more for their image than for my feelings. I didn't respond to any of these letters. Each one I received, I shared with Dustin and we discussed it, but ultimately, I knew that engaging would only open old wounds. Instead, I focused on building my new life, my new family. As I sit here now, writing this final update, I find myself filled with hope and excitement for the future. My hand rests on my slightly swollen belly, where our first child is growing. We don't know yet if it's a boy or a girl, but we do know that this child will be loved unconditionally and allowed to be exactly who they are. Dustin's parents, mom and dad, as I call them now, are over the moon about becoming grandparents. They call regularly to check on me, send baby gifts, and have already started planning their visits after the baby is born. Their love and support continue to be a source of strength and joy in my life. I haven't heard from my biological family in months now. I don't know if my parents have truly realized the harm they caused, and honestly, I've reached a point where I don't need to know. They are a chapter of my life that has closed, and I'm at peace with that.